From protecting vulnerable populations to promoting sustainable tourism, the United Nations is tackling some big issues. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. The climate crisis, the conflict in Ukraine and sustainable development are expected to dominate talks at this year's United Nations General Assembly. The general debate opens Tuesday with the annual report from UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres on the state of the world. Leaders from the 193 member countries will also have a chance to address the international community with speeches over the next week. This year is the 75th anniversary of the United Nations Peacekeeping operations, which China is a major financial contributor. I had the chance to talk with Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the Under-Secretary-General for Peacekeeping Operations. Monsieur Lacroix, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk about one of the United Nations' most important functions, if not the most important, and that is international peacekeeping. That is something that is under your purview. China, of course, is a significant contributor to both the finances of peacekeeping operations as well as troops. How would you characterize China's involvement in international peacekeeping operations?
Thank you very much for having me, and it's giving me a good opportunity to talk about China's support to peacekeeping just a few days after I visited Beijing and had a number of meetings with officials and the Chinese government. Indeed, I mean, China is a very important partner to peacekeeping in many different ways. As you noted, China is one of the most important financial contributors to peacekeeping, but it's also one of the most important troop and police contributing countries to peacekeeping. And of course, it is very important for us to count on this continued support. I would also add that we have had the support of China to the initiatives that we have taken, that we are currently implementing regarding the improvement of peacekeeping. And I have in mind, in particular, the leadership role that China has taken regarding the very critical file of the safety and security of peacekeepers. China has initiated a resolution of the Security Council on this very important topic, and also has been very instrumental in the creation of the group of member states, so-called Group of Friends of the Safety and Security of Peacekeepers. So just, I mean, these are really the many areas in which we're able to count on China's support. Of course, it's highly appreciated.
Right, you talk about the safety of peacekeepers, and of course we live in a rapidly changing world where there are new challenges emerging all the time. This is the 75th anniversary of UN peacekeeping. In recent years, we've seen things like the scourge of terrorism. We've seen how organized crime has got involved in many countries, destabilizing many societies as well. We've seen the level of violence in many countries. I mean, one could take Haiti as an example. What are the challenges, the new challenges that you and UN peacekeeping is facing right now?
Indeed, we are facing significant challenges, and I would say that most of our peacekeeping operations have had a deteriorated political and security environment over the last couple of years, even if I compare with 2 or 3 years ago. I think probably one of our key challenges is political, and is the fact that we have an international community membership that is more divided than before. And of course, that has an impact on our peacekeeping operation, and that particularly has an impact on the fact that we cannot count anymore on a united and strong and committed support and active support from our member states to the political processes that are linked with our peacekeeping operations. Every peacekeeping operation is deployed to support political efforts. But so that division across our membership is weakening the ability of the international community to actively and support these peace processes, and also in a united manner. But we're also facing challenges related to the evolution of conflict. You mentioned terrorism, which is an important factor that is affecting our peacekeepers in many places around the world. We are faced with the evolving threats, such as the increased use of improvised explosive devices that are affecting our peacekeepers, various sophisticated attacks against our people and our camps. And we're also facing the increasing threats of misinformation, disinformation, which is really weaponized now, and which has become a major threat to our peacekeepers, but also to the population that we're supporting. So, with all these challenges, what we need to do is to continue to adapt. We need to continue and even step up our efforts in terms of supporting better safety and security conditions for our peacekeepers, supporting the fight against misinformation, disinformation, adapting peacekeeping to the evolving digital technologies, making sure that we can make the best use of these technologies, continue our efforts to improve the number and role of women in peacekeeping, which is a key condition for the efficiency of our operations. So we need to do all this. And I really appreciate the fact that China has always been very supportive to all these initiatives.
Do you find that there is a recognition among member states that you do face these new challenges, and that, as you point out, you need to adapt? I mean, is the will there?
I think there is a recognition of the challenges, and I think there is also a recognition of the fact that we need to adapt. And indeed, all the initiatives that are mentioned to you and that are sort of regrouped under the umbrella initiative of the Secretary-General of the United Nations, which is called Action for Peacekeeping. All these initiatives are widely supported by our member states. Now, I believe that it is also important to look at the fact that even if many of our peacekeeping operations are faced with the lack of progress in the political processes that they are supporting, it is important to be aware of the fact that thanks to the presence of our peacekeepers, ceasefires are being maintained. In other words, our peacekeepers prevent the resumption of facilities in many places where they are deployed. Our peacekeepers are also protecting hundreds of thousands of civilians every single day, and sometimes they are doing this alone with very few, if any, presence of the security forces of host government. And I think it's important to be aware, because it is always important to think of okay, what would happen if these peace operations were not there? What would be the consequences? And I believe that some of the developments in some countries where peacekeeping operations were deployed at a point and are not there anymore, I think should give us a pause, or at least should really make us think about what is the alternative? What if those peacekeeping operations were not there anymore?
Unfortunately, we live in a world that is still beset by violence. I mean, if we look over the last few years, or the last few decades, I should say, we've seen some of the worst atrocities being committed. If we look at the violence that took place in the Balkans or the Rwandan genocide. Are there any lessons that UN peacekeeping has learned to prevent a recurrence of these kinds of tragedies happening in the future?
Absolutely. I think first of all, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres puts a lot of emphasis on prevention, and I think it is critically important to be more effective in preventing conflict, which implies that first of all, we need more unity across the international community, but we also need to work to do more on the drivers of conflict. I would mention the impact of climate change. I would mention the impact of global terrorism. I would mention also the impact of transnational criminal activities, such as the exploitation of natural resources or the various trafficking in arms or human beings or drugs. And all of this is massively fueling conflict around the world. In terms of peacekeeping itself, of course, peacekeeping needs to be more effective in protecting civilians. It is always very challenging and always confronted with the fact that expectations are very high when the peacekeepers are given the mandate of protecting civilians. But even with this challenge, again, I repeat that our peacekeepers are protecting civilians, hundreds of thousands of them every single day in many places around the world. But we need to be better, and this is why we need to work on the important issues such as improving situational awareness. In other words, improving the ability of our peacekeepers to know about the threats, to know about the environment, and also to be more reactive with increase and enhancement of their mobility, enhancement of the coordination between the civilian part, the police, and the military part. More women in peacekeeping also improves our ability to protect civilians and also to know better about the threats that are affecting those civilians. So there's a wide array of initiatives that are needed, really, and that we need to pursue vigorously, really, to make sure that we do as best as possible in regarding our mandate for the protection of civilians.
Right, so UN peacekeepers, as you point out, are protecting hundreds of thousands of civilians around the world. Where do you see on the ground your biggest challenges right now?
Well, I would say that most of our peacekeeping operations are facing challenges. I think, of course, we are currently in the process of withdrawing our peacekeeping mission in Mali as a result of the decision by the Malian authorities. So that is the immediate challenge that we face, and against the backdrop of a situation that is challenging. But we are doing our best, of course, to make sure that this will happen in the best possible conditions. Otherwise, I believe that as I say, I mean, we are unfortunately seeing a deteriorated security environment in many, if not most, of our peacekeeping missions, be it in Africa or in the Middle East or elsewhere in Europe. And I think that is really a concern. Again, I think that in those critical times, what we need is, number one, to make sure that our member states fully understand the challenges that we face and act accordingly, meaning that we need continuous support to our initiatives to improve safety and security, effectiveness, situational awareness, and adapting to the evolving technologies and all this. And we need as much unity as possible from our member states in support of our peacekeeping operations. I know it's challenging because we have a divided membership, but our missions, our peacekeeping missions, are their mission. They are the missions of our member states. The member states decide on their mandate and decide on their finance. So we need them to be really as supportive as possible. I again appreciate the fact that we have received continuous support from China to the efforts that we're making to make sure that our peacekeeping operations will be up to the task.
Right now, the international community is focused on the conflict in Ukraine. It's having an impact around the world, and the two sides are no nearer a diplomatic solution. Do you think the deployment of UN peacekeeping force could form part of a wider negotiated solution to this conflict?
Well, I think that we are definitely not there at this point, and I don't really know whether at a later stage that option would be considered. The Secretary-General recently said that he would be ready, of course, to be more involved in peace efforts, and at the same time, you would have noted that he indicated also that unfortunately he thought that at this point the time was not there, or the conditions were not there for such a role. But we are all hopeful, of course, that the time will come when more efforts towards a peaceful solution, according to the resolution of the General Assembly, the conditions will be there.
Monsieur Lacroix, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. All the best.
As the world recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic, tourism has started to make a comeback. The United Nations World Tourism Organization is one of 15 specialized agencies at the UN working to promote sustainable tourism. I had the chance to speak with the agency's executive director, Zoritsa Urosevic. Zoritsa Urosevic, thanks so much for joining us. Now, tourism is a major driver of world growth. It accounts for about 10% of global GDP. But of course, in recent years, we've seen the impact of COVID. And in many instances, with all the shutdowns that we saw, it's grounded the industry. How would you assess the impact that COVID has had on world tourism?
Thank you for having me. Indeed, it is not only 10% of world GDP, but it is in 2019, tourism was the third export earning category after fuels and chemicals, as it is trading services. So we very well know that tourism suffered its deepest crisis in record history during COVID-19 pandemic. Global lockdowns, widespread travel restriction, and a slump in demand resulted in 72% decline in international tourist arrivals in 2020 and 69% in 2021 compared to 2019. This represents a loss of 2.1 billion international arrivals. We were at 1.5 billion in 2019. And we recorded a combined loss of 2.1 trillion in export revenues from international tourism during that 2 years period.
So, have you seen that there are some parts of the world that were worse off after COVID than other parts of the world?
Absolutely, because all the regions were not even in opening back their borders. And all regions suffered massive decline in arrivals in 2020. And the region that really suffered the most was Asia and the Pacific, the first region to be hit, and the one with the strongest travel restrictions in place, suffered the largest decline in relative terms, with 84% decrease in international arrivals in 2020. Europe suffered the largest drop in absolute term because it's one of the biggest markets on the pyramid. Europe welcomes more than 50% of international arrivals, with over 500 fewer international tourists in 2020. But it's not just about numbers. Also badly hit were destinations where tourism is a lifeline. I mean, small island states, many of them rely heavily on tourism, and for some of them, it's 75% of the GDP. So the pause in tourism cut that lifeline, which is why UNWTO made sure that all governments recognize the vital importance of getting the world moving back.
Now, there are many countries that have recovered from the COVID pandemic, in some instances up to 83% from pre-pandemic levels. What is your organization doing to help those countries and regions that are still struggling to recover?
First and foremost, from the time of the pandemic, I think it changed the governance, not only of tourism, but it changed as well the governance on the way we work. We were all locked down and we were working, I can remember working 15 hours a day because we had to cover from Pacific to Chile, and basically the whole day and the night we were always at disposal. We have learned that the governance at the national level is certainly the most critical, or I can say most positive factor for success for the countries that have recovered fast, that have lost the less, And some countries today, we can account from the UNWTO barometer in the first quarter, some countries have even done better than in 2019. For example, the region of the Middle East, the destinations have done better performance than in 2019. Now, to go back to your question, I think that the support that we are providing to the government and to the trade when it comes to building a very meaningful dialogue, supported by evidence-based, I can say, proof, action and policy, has been certainly one of the core support that we have provided.
I want to talk specifically about China right now. China was the biggest source of international travel, with 155 million Chinese tourists spending $750 billion. That was in 2019, before the pandemic. How critical will China's role be in the future as the globe tries to recover?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very important question because the whole world was waiting for China to reopen. And just to reposition, China, US, and Germany remain the world's top sources of market when it, even during the pandemic, accounting for over 1/3 of expenditure of international travel in 2021. So we see China's reopening to international tourism as the final piece in the sector's recovery. This is the puzzle that finally has got last little piece. But we as well are very proud that the dialogue with China, who is one of our main member states as we are an international organization, we were invited, our Secretary General, Zoritsa Urosevic, was invited to be part of the official reopening of borders in February 23. The return to China in coming days and we are going back to China now, to Macau, with the Global Tourism Economic Forum in a few days to be happening. So it's early maybe to put a number on the impact of China's return, but a full return will not happen overnight. This we very well know, but it has boosted confidence. And we very well know as well that during the pandemic, China was one of the most successful countries in strengthening the domestic tourism, which was already very big, but which has expanded, and most importantly, expanded to regions that are, I can say, less known, more remote area. So all this market for inbound international tourism is going to be as well available. So good perspectives.
Right, now the World Tourism Organization doesn't operate in isolation, of course. You depend on the resources of other agencies at the UN as well. And we know that COVID has not been completely eradicated. So how does the UN use all its resources to coordinate international travel protocols so that when people travel, they can be confident and feel assured that they will be safe?
When COVID started, I was at the time based in Geneva, and just for the little story, 2 days before the pandemic was declared, I asked the Secretary General to come to meet with Dr. Tedros in WHO. And then we knew very well the seriousness of the situation, and we had to prepare for that. So from day one, first we created a recovery committee that has been a crisis committee, which has been immediately actioned, which was including the key actors and stakeholders from the multilateral system, such as the World Health Organization, but as well ICAO, because international travel is mainly through air transport. And we knew that as we are part of ICAO and CAPSCA, and the ICAO CART, which is a framework for crisis management, we were ongoingly monitoring, providing input, sharing with our constituency, and advising on the best way possible to unfold the most appropriate protocols. And this work is still going on. I can say this tripartite dialogue between UNWTO, ICAO, and WHO. And on the other hand, we have as well emerged with new initiative directly with WHO. We have established now a first group that is in Europe for small destinations, because small destinations have more difficulty in handling any crisis. And we're going to expand that broadly on the global level. So really preparedness and risk management is really at the forefront of resilience.
Right. You know, unfortunately, we are at a time in the world right now where we see growing tensions, we see growing divisions. What can international tourism do to promote more people-to-people exchanges, more understanding around the world?
You're totally right. I think that the COVID crisis has brought us closer in the neighborhood, but it has brought us closer because we were fighting all against the same cause, which is the pandemic. And I think that tourism is the ultimate people-to-people sector, because what you dream of when you go and visit a destination is to meet other people. So it has its unique ability to foster peace and understanding across borders and multicultural dialogue for peace. So tourism stands for peace and against war and aggression. And UNWTO members voted to suspend the country following its invasion of Ukraine. So that's on the governance side. But I think when it comes to people, I think that after COVID as well, there has been a kind of a regain of caring about the others. And I think that tourism can be really a vehicle for peace.
Climate activists have expressed their concerns over the increase in tourism. And of course, you know, the more planes that are flying, that increases the world's carbon footprint. But of course, there are ways in which we can still have a high level of tourism in sustainable tourism. What is being done to promote that?
Absolutely. The work of the World Tourism Organization on climate, I can say very grounded work with UNEP and UNFCCC started in 2007 when we published the first report that was, I can say, creating econometrics to measure the overall impact of the sector. At the time, the sector footprint was 5%. Out of the 5%, it was 3.2% for aviation, about 1.5% for accommodation, and about the rest for 0.3% for leisure activities. Now, of course, the numbers have increased, and of course, the footprint has increased. So our latest data says that we can account about 8% of carbon emissions on tourism. However, we know as well that, as you said earlier, in 2019, 10% of world GDP is related to tourism. So on the one side, we do bad, on the other side, we do good. So we know as well that certain nations, and I mentioned it earlier, small island developing states, for them, tourism is not an option. Tourism is a public good, because without tourism, they cannot sustain and survive. So it is our role to support the right policies for climate action, incentivize the private sector for circularity towards a net zero emission sector. And I can say that science is the answer, because science is actually what is going to empower us to move the shift, to transform the sector, and to really scale up action. I just want to share some flagship initiative that we have, that is the Glasgow Declaration for Climate Action in Tourism. We have more than 800 signatories, which aims, the declaration aims to promote, of course, a shift in policy and business, but in the sector of decarbonizing, regenerating, measuring, financing, and cooperating. So this is a great advancement. This is done in collaboration with UNEP and UNFCCC, and we have many countries that have signatory, but as well many private sector. So our role is to guide and to find solutions. The other part of the work in which we are going to actually shine in the future, in the few months, we are since several years working on the UN statistical framework, not only for UNWTO member states, but for 193 countries of the United Nations with the Statistical Commission on the measuring sustainable tourism, which is going to be the first framework beyond GDP, which we are going to offer to the sector. And for the first time, we will be able to really measure the impact, not only on climate, but on people. Because there is no action that is good enough for the planet if it is not good for the people. So at the end of the day, it's all about people.
Zoritsa Urosevic, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, CGTN, for having us.
And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.